We've all heard the saying, the greatest thing since sliced bread. It's the ultimate gold standard for human innovation. It's how we describe every truly great invention, from the first smartphone to the world-changing power of the internet. We take sliced bread so much for granted today that it's almost impossible to imagine a world where you have to struggle with a dull knife and a crumbly loaf just to make a simple sandwich. It's the peak of kitchen convenience. It's a global staple. It's completely harmless, or so we think. What if I told you that in 1943, at the height of World War II, the United States government decided that sliced bread was a genuine threat to the war effort? What if I told you that for a brief, chaotic period in American history, selling a pre-sliced loaf of bread was actually a federal crime? It sounds like a joke, or maybe a weird urban legend your grandfather would tell, but it's 100% true. For 7 weeks, the greatest thing ever was officially banned, and the public reaction was so intense it nearly caused a national morale crisis. So, why did the government go after your lunch? Was it about the steel? Was it about the paper? Or was it something much weirder? Let's break it down. Welcome to the smart side. To understand the ban, we first have to understand why sliced bread was such a revolutionary deal in the first place. Before 1928, if you wanted bread, you bought a whole loaf from a bakery, or you baked it yourself, and then you were on your own. This sounds easy enough, but in reality, it was a culinary nightmare. Homemade slices were rarely even. They were either too thick to fit in a toaster, or so thin they'd fall apart as soon as you tried to spread a little butter on them. Plus, there was the freshness problem. Every time you cut a slice, the rest of the loaf started drying out immediately. Enter a man named Otto Ritter. Otto wasn't a baker. He was actually a jeweler from Iowa. But Otto had a strange, single-minded obsession. He wanted to build a machine that could slice and wrap a loaf of bread automatically. People thought he was absolutely crazy. Professional bakers laughed at him. They told him that if you sliced bread before selling it, it would go stale in minutes and turn into a pile of hard, dry crumbs. Even his closest friends told him to give up on the dream. And then, tragedy struck. In 1917, a massive fire destroyed his workshop. He lost everything: his blueprints, his original prototype, and his life savings. Most people would have quit right there, but Otto spent the next 10 years rebuilding from scratch. He realized that the secret wasn't just the slicing, it was the wrapping. He designed a machine that would slice the bread and then immediately wrap it in wax paper to lock in every bit of moisture. On July 7, 1928, the first loaf of pre-sliced bread went on sale in a tiny bakery in Chillicothe, Missouri. The success was instant. It was like a dam had burst. Within 5 years, nearly 80% of all bread sold in America was pre-sliced. It changed everything in the American household. It led to the invention of the automatic pop-up toaster. It changed the way mothers packed school lunches. It made bread consumption skyrocket because it was just so easy to grab a slice and go. By the 1940s, Americans were officially hooked. We had become a nation of slicers. But then came World War II. The world was on fire, and everything changed. When America entered the war, the entire country shifted into total war mode. Everything was being rationed or diverted to the front lines: rubber for tires, gasoline for planes, sugar, and meat. In early 1943, a man named Claude R. Wickard turned his eyes toward the bakery. Wickard was the Secretary of Agriculture and the head of the War Food Administration. He was looking for ways to cut costs everywhere. On January 18, 1943, Wickard dropped a bombshell on American households: a nationwide ban on the sale of sliced bread. From that day forward, bakeries were only allowed to sell whole, unsliced loaves to the public. If a baker was caught using a slicing machine, they faced heavy federal fines or even jail time. The government gave 3 main reasons for this. First, they claimed it was about the wax paper. Because sliced bread has more surface area exposed to the air, it requires a much heavier, double-wrapped layer of wax paper to stay fresh. The government argued that this wax paper was desperately needed for military packaging and supplies. Second, they pointed to the slicing machines themselves. They were made of high-quality, heavy-duty steel. The spare parts and those sharp blades were becoming scarce. The government wanted that metal to be diverted to making tanks and planes. And third, they believed that sliced bread encouraged waste. Because it was so easy to just grab a slice, the government thought people were eating more than they actually needed. Wickard believed that if people had to slice their own bread, they'd be more careful with it, and the loaves would last longer in the pantry. On paper, the logic seemed sound. In reality, it was a public relations disaster of epic proportions. The ban went into effect on a Monday, and by Tuesday morning, the entire country was in an uproar. American kitchens weren't ready to go back to the dark ages of hand. For 15 years, people had been buying bread that was perfectly uniform and easy to use. Now, suddenly, mothers were trying to pack school lunches with uneven, squashed slices of bread. They looked like they'd been hacked at with a chainsaw. Sandwiches were falling apart in lunchboxes across the country. The newspapers were flooded with angry complaints. The most famous protest came from a frustrated housewife in New York. She wrote a letter to the New York Times that became a rallying cry for the whole nation. She wrote, "I should like to let you know how important sliced bread is to the morale and sanity of a household." She explained that with a husband and 4 children all in a rush, hand slicing created more mess, more work, and more frustration. And it wasn't just about the extra work. People realized that the government's savings didn't actually exist. Because people weren't professional bread slicers, they were hacking up the loaves and creating piles of wasted crumbs. Plus, without the professional-grade wrapping that came with sliced bread, the home-sliced loaves were actually going stale faster. The ban was supposed to save bread, but it was actually causing more of it to be thrown into the trash. Then there was the black market. Believe it or not, a black market for sliced bread actually started to form. Some small-town bakers secretly kept their machines running in back rooms, hidden from the authorities. They sold sliced loaves to their most loyal customers under the table, like it was some kind of illegal substance. People were hoarding bread-slicing knives like they were gold. Department stores saw a massive surge in sales for high-end serrated knives, which were also made of the very steel the government wanted to save. Claude Wickard and the War Food Administration tried to hold their ground. They told the public to be patient and be patriotic, but the pressure was relentless. The sliced bread rebellion became a symbol of government overreach. People felt that if the war was so desperate that we couldn't even have sliced bread, then the situation must be much worse than they were being told. It caused a dip in national morale that wasn't worth the small amount of wax paper they were supposedly saving. Finally, after only 7 weeks, the government folded under the pressure. On March 8, 1943, the ban was officially lifted. The War Food Administration released a statement that was basically a giant admission of failure. They said, "The savings are not as great as we anticipated." The news of the ban being lifted was treated like a major military victory on the front lines. Headlines across the country shouted, "Sliced bread is back." People literally cheered in the streets. It is one of the few times in history where a government regulation was defeated purely by the sheer frustration of the average citizen. But this weird moment in history tells us something important about how we live today. The reason people fought so hard for sliced bread wasn't just because they were lazy or preferred the look of a thin slice. It's because once you introduce a meaningful convenience into a society, it becomes a part of the human standard. You can't put the genie back in the bottle once people realize there's a better way to do things. Sliced bread had changed the way the American family functioned. It saved time. It reduced morning stress, and it created a standardized experience. Otto Rohwedder, the jeweler who spent 10 years of his life trying to convince people that sliced bread was a good idea, was right. He didn't just invent a product. He changed the rhythm of the modern kitchen forever. Today, we use the phrase, "the greatest thing since sliced bread," as a bit of a cliché, a joke we tell without thinking. But the next time you make a sandwich or pop a couple of perfect uniform slices into the toaster, remember the rebellion of 1943. Remember that for a few weeks, those simple slices were a symbol of freedom and the limit of what people are willing to sacrifice. Sometimes, the smallest inventions are the ones we'd fight the hardest to keep. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the weirdest ban in history, I'd really appreciate it if you hit that like button and subscribe to The Smart Side. It helps us keep digging into the why behind the what. See you in the next one.